morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Ellison Barber. Savannah Sellers is off this morning. Right now on Morning News Now, Supreme shakeup. Big changes ahead for the nation's highest court. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer expected to formally announce he is stepping down. The retirement first reported by NBC News, now paving the way for President Biden to replace him with another liberal. And he's expected to make history by naming the first black woman to the court. Who might be on the short list and what this means for the future of the court? We have team coverage this morning. Diplomacy in doubt. New developments out of Eastern Europe this morning. Right now, Russia moving warships into the Black Sea after the U.S. rejected Russia's demands to keep Ukraine out of NATO. But there's still hope for a peaceful resolution.
We're open to dialogue. We prefer diplomacy. And we're prepared to move forward where there is the possibility of communication and cooperation.
So will Russia choose to take this, quote, diplomatic path forward? The latest from Kyiv and Washington this morning. Raising rates, a major move by the Fed that's sure to impact your bottom line. Interest rates are on their way up for the first time in 3 years. When that might happen and what it means for everything from your mortgage and your car loans. And honoring a hero, a touching tribute 8 decades in the making. A Navy sailor killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor, finally identified and brought back to the United States. The emotional homecoming, all thanks to modern technology.
Good to have you with us. Welcome.
With you. Thank you for having me back. I appreciate
our
it.
new studio, which is your first time here with us in the morning.
I am impressed. I am already impressed. We're off to a good start. We will begin this morning with that major news from the Supreme Court. After more than 27 years, Justice Stephen Breyer intends to step down.
Breyer is set to appear with President Joe Biden later today, make a formal announcement. That's according to a source familiar with the matter. And Breyer's decision gives the White House the chance to name his replacement while Democrats still control the Senate. At age 83, he's the court's oldest justice, appears to be in good health, but he's also well aware that some progressives felt that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg stayed on the court too long despite battles with cancer. Her death in 2020 allowed President Trump to appoint Amy Coney Barrett, giving the court a 6-3 conservative majority. From Justice Breyer's legacy to the search for a new justice, we have a team of correspondents ready to break down the latest on this history-making development this morning. We're going to begin with NBC News correspondent Ken Delaney and Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell. So, Ken, let's start with you and the timing of this announcement. This was critical for Democrats to be able to replace him while they control the Senate. Do we know how much pressure he was under to retire now?
Good morning, Joe. Well, he was under enormous pressure, everything from polite questions from Democratic senators at dinner parties to a campaign by progressives that included renting a truck with a billboard, "Retire Breyer," and driving it around the Supreme Court. But it's not clear that that pressure is what swayed him. He knew very well the situation. He's a creature of Washington. He once worked as a staffer for the Senate Judiciary Committee for Edward Kennedy. And what he's done here is he's given President Biden the perfect opportunity, plenty of time to name a successor, also to change the narrative in a situation where Biden is under, his approval ratings are falling. He's got problems all around. Here's a chance for him to get a big win. So Breyer has done all that. He lived through the Ruth Bader Ginsburg situation. He saw how that turned out, how she was replaced with a very conservative justice. I've been covering arguments recently where he's been on the wrong side of issues that he cares deeply about, like abortion, and even most recently the vaccine mandate, where he just has seemed exasperated with the direction of the conservative court. And so while this isn't going to change the balance of the court, obviously it prevents the court from becoming that much more conservative, and that was important to him, and that's what he's done here by announcing his retirement.
Leanne, on the surface, this might seem like a slam dunk for Democrats, but nothing is easy in Congress these days. We can probably expect a battle during the Senate confirmation process. So walk us through the timeline, when we can expect a nominee to be named, and also what is the fight that's really shaping up between Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill over this?
Yeah, Joe, nothing is easy in Congress, but what we do know is that Democratic leaders, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, have said that they want to move this very quickly. Now, Justice Breyer is not going to step down until the end of the term in June, but the Senate can move that process forward. Of course, they have to wait for a nominee, and that's up to the White House and President Biden. But once that nominee is named, we can expect this to move very quickly. They want to move this as quickly or close to as quickly as Amy Coney Barrett was moved. And that happened in less than a month from the time she was nominated to the time she was confirmed. As far as the fight, well, of course, Senate Democrats are going to have to keep all 50 Democrats together in order for this nomination to pass through. And the Republicans are going to do everything in their power to try to pick off some of those Democrats and label whatever nominee it is as a radical liberal who wants to legislate from the bench. And so this is also a campaign year as well. So this is also going to be a big campaign issue for both parties, Joe.
Let's not forget this is happening in a midterm year. So Ken, the White House has likely been planning on this, has a short list of nominees ready to go. During the presidential campaign, President Biden said if he was given the opportunity, he would nominate the first black woman to the Supreme Court. Let's listen to that.
I committed that if I'm elected president, have an opportunity to appoint someone to the courts, I'll appoint the first black woman to the courts. It's required that they have representation now. It's long overdue.
So, Ken, what do we know about any potential replacements for Justice Breyer?
Joe, the two names we're hearing most often are Ketanji Brown Jackson of the D.C. Appeals Court and Leandra Kruger of the California Supreme Court, both relatively young women with Ivy League pedigrees. Brown Jackson actually was confirmed by the Senate to her current post with 3 Republican votes. She's got a family connection to former House Speaker Paul Ryan. Her husband is the twin brother of Ryan's brother-in-law. And she's author of that decision that we've reported on here requiring former White House counsel Don McGahn to testify to the House Impeachment Committee where Donald Trump was trying to prevent that. And Brown Jackson wrote famously, "Presidents are not kings." Leandra Kruger, also a former Justice Department official on the California Supreme Court. So those are two names that have been bandied about. And of course, they would attract presumably all 50 Democratic senators, but we'll have to see.
And Leanne, I want to talk more about something you brought up. The Democrats have the votes to get a Supreme Court nominee through, but only if they're on the same page. So we know in the past for other issues, Senators Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema have prevented Democrats from getting some major pieces of legislation through. Are we hearing anything from them about this morning?
Not yet, Joe. Senator Manchin put out a statement yesterday, a very bland statement saying that he's going to consider whatever nominee moves forward. We haven't heard much from Senator Sinema just yet, but I will say that this is different. Senator Joe Manchin historically has given deference to the president and has usually voted for the president's nominees, including President Trump's nominees. And Kyrsten Sinema, some of these issues that are really important to the court are really important to her, including choice. So I think it might be easier to keep Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin with the party on this issue. But again, no one's been named yet, and so we'll have to wait to see.
Ken and Leanne, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And after serving on the court for nearly 28 years, Justice Breyer is, of course, leaving behind a long legacy of important opinions, ones that will continue to shape our democracy for years, decades to come. Joining us now to discuss that legacy is Paul Smith. He's a professor at Georgetown Law. Paul, thank you so much for being here. Let's just dive right in and start talking about this justice who has spent a long time as a name many people may know. People, even if they don't realize they know it, are probably familiar and have felt the impacts of some of his decisions. He is, of course, the court's most senior liberal justice, but he's always been known as a pragmatist. I want to play something that he said to MSNBC's Ari Melber back in 2020 and then ask you about it on the other side. Let's listen.
What's in the judge's mind doesn't really matter. What matters are the words on the paper. And it's important for the judge not to forget that, because it's those words on the paper that will be the guide to the future.
Paul, have you seen that style of interpretation in some of his opinions, some of the biggest ones, perhaps?
Sure. No, he's always been a person who cares about getting to the right destination and doing what you have to do to get there. And when they say he's a pragmatist, that's certainly true. He was also a uniter, one who in recent years was skilled at trying to get a fifth vote over from the right side of the court to the left side of the court. He's often credited with saving Obamacare in the first big challenge. So he has had enormous impact, and it cares about results more than anything else.
And Paul, you have had the rare experience of arguing cases before the Supreme Court. A lot of those were before Justice Breyer. Is there a memory, a moment that stands out to you about Justice Breyer? And in terms of his questions, we hear so much about the style of questions from these justices, one who rarely asks them. How do you describe Justice Breyer's style of questioning?
Well, he's very professorial. He was a Harvard professor, and any advocate before the court since he's been there will tell you the same thing. He has this tendency toward the end of your 30 minutes when you're trying to squeeze in your last important points to take the floor and ask you a question that can go on for 3 or 4 minutes and leave you a little bit hamstrung at the end there without the opportunity to really say everything you want to say. That's just the way he is as a professor. He doesn't mean it meanly. It's just his style. But I would say, I mean, in terms of memories of him with cases I've argued, there was a case I argued about violent video games and whether they could be banned for children. Big First Amendment case. Justice Breyer, of course, had never seen a violent video game before. They showed him some up in the library, and he was just appalled. He said, I'm all for the First Amendment, but not this. And so he grilled me pretty good, and I didn't get his vote there.
And part of his legacy now will be his decision to retire. It's something that activists have been urging him to do for quite a while now. How memorable will his decision to step aside be?
Well, anytime a Supreme Court justice steps down, it's a big deal, particularly in our divided, polarized world. That he will be missed because of his ability to gather votes together, although I think it's been harder for him now that it's a 6-3 court instead of a 5-4 court when he was very effective. And he probably was seeing that this wasn't going to be as productive a time for him on the court and was ready to go.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for your insight and your memories. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Overseas now, where efforts continue to stop Russia from invading Ukraine. Just a day after the U.S. issued a written response to Russian demands, the Kremlin is now saying it's not optimistic it will be enough to change the current situation. U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, had delivered the response to Russia's foreign minister in Moscow yesterday. Even though the U.S. has not made its response public, it has already warned that Russia's top demands, like banning Ukraine from joining NATO, are unacceptable.
Right now, the document is with them, and the ball is in their court. We'll see what we do, as I've said repeatedly, whether they choose the path of diplomacy and dialogue, whether they decide to renew aggression against Ukraine, we're prepared either way.
The Kremlin says Vladimir Putin is taking the next few days to review the Americans' response. The Russian Defense Ministry released this video just a few hours ago showing troops preparing for more drills along the Ukrainian border. All of this despite Russia denying it will invade its neighbor. State Department officials are now saying there are signs an invasion could come between now and mid-February. We're covering the growing tensions from Kyiv to Washington. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in Ukraine. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman is covering the U.S. response from D.C. Matt, let's start with you. What's Russia saying so far about this written response from the U.S.?
Yeah, Joe, I mean, just exactly what you said, that they're not optimistic. They're going to be studying it. They seem to think that this is, you know, a part of the diplomacy that's been running so long on so many different tracks and has so far achieved absolutely nothing. And so you could see this latest development, this handing over of letters, this responses, as of a piece with the broader failure of diplomacy and negotiations that has really defined this crisis up until now. Joe?
Josh, Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he's going to speak with Russia's foreign minister sometime in the next few days. We know the two spoke last week in Geneva. So how is Blinken preparing for this new meeting, especially if Russia just isn't budging on these demands?
Well, the Biden administration at this point, Joe, really feels like the ball is back in President Putin's court after delivering that document to the Russians, which State Department officials say, look, there's nothing particularly new in there. The Russians know where the U.S. stands on these basic issues because of that call that he had earlier with Lavrov, of these other meetings they've had with the Russians, and that basically they've now codified in this document what the U.S. is willing to discuss with the Russians Russians if there's room for a diplomatic path here on placement of missiles, on transparency around U.S. troops in the region, but that the door to NATO remains open, that the basic core demand from the Russians that NATO's expansion be rolled back and Ukraine barred from entering in the future is a complete non-starter from the U.S. So from that point of view, there hasn't been much of a shift in the U.S. position. As Matt just described, there hasn't been a shift in the Russian position. The main shift that we have been seeing and that U.S. officials are watching is more and more Russian military buildup near the border with Ukraine, as well as in Belarus. Take a listen to what Secretary of State Antony Blinken had to say about where things stand right now.
All told, our actions over the past week have sharpened the choice facing Russia now. We've laid out a diplomatic path. We've lined up steep consequences should Russia choose further aggression. It remains up to Russia to decide how to respond. We're ready either way.
And so really the main activity on the U.S. side at this point, while they wait a response to that written document from the Russians, is to do everything they possibly can, Joe, to maintain the appearance of unity between the U.S. and its European partners within Europe about the willingness to take strong action to punish President Putin if he invades. That has been an ongoing challenge, and so they are doing everything they can right now to try to keep that going.
All right, so while all this diplomacy continues, Matt, more Russian troops are surrounding Ukraine, and Secretary Blinken does have a message for Americans who stay in the country. Get out now, because the U.S. will not evacuate you if there is an invasion. So what is the status on the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv? What could happen to it if Russia does step foot in Ukraine?
I mean, as with a lot of the questions you're asking me, I simply don't know. I think a lot of the people who are involved in this don't know either, and this is all going to have to, be contingent upon what Vladimir Putin decides to do in the coming days and weeks. Now, when it comes to the embassy, if you'll remember, just a couple of days ago, there were this sort of eye-popping headlines we heard about how the U.S. Embassy had authorized evacuation of non-essential personnel, basically volunteering for them to leave if they decided to leave, and all non-essential family members have to leave. Now, this is, kind of standard operating procedure, but the fact is that most of those non-essential staff members decided to stay. The reporting from the State Department have said most of them are staying here in Ukraine, even if their family members are leaving. But, that decision, that announcement really upset the Ukrainian government, because it just added to this feeling of panic, and it added to sentiments here on the ground that a lot of this crisis has simply been manufactured or exaggerated by the West and by Moscow, and that it's the Ukrainians who are the victims.
Now, Josh, State Department officials say there is a major factor that could impact the timing of a Russian invasion: the Beijing Olympics, which start in a week. Quickly, why is that?
Well, the relationship between Russia and China is clearly very important. And with the start of those Olympics just days away, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman had this to say about how that could play into Putin's decision. Take a listen.
We all are aware that the Beijing Olympics begin on February 4th, the opening ceremony, and President Putin expects to be there. I think that probably President Xi Jinping would not be ecstatic if Putin chose that moment to invade Ukraine. So that may affect his timing and his thinking.
Now, Beijing has denied asking Putin to hold off on an invasion related to the timing of the Olympics. But we should also point out the U.S. has also been talking about Putin's decision-making on timing relative to the weather, frankly, in Ukraine, when they can move their tanks in and out without them getting stuck in the mud. And it just goes to show you how much guessing the U.S. is doing right now about what Putin is doing, trying to estimate how he would take various timing and weather factors into consideration. It speaks to how little the U.S. really knows at this point about what Putin's going to do, Joe.
So much at play. All right, Matt, Josh, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Turning now to the growing concerns over a potential new Omicron subvariant. Health officials are tracking the variant spread in the United States. At least 22 states have already detected this Omicron subvariant, but it's not yet clear how dangerous the strain might be. It comes as Omicron cases continue to surge in the U.S., particularly in the West. And a new study suggests over 2/3 of Omicron cases are reinfections, almost completely replacing the previously dominant Delta Delta strain. Meanwhile, many people are receiving their free at-home testing kits from the government this week. Despite the progress in COVID testing, Dr. Anthony Fauci warns we still have more work to do. Listen.
We believe we can get there because we have the tools with vaccines, with boosts, with masks, with tests, and with antivirals. That's what we talk about when we get to the point where we can, quote, live with the virus. But as Dr. Walensky emphasized, that is not where we are at this point. So we still have a way to go.
Dr. Ebony Jade joins us. Ebony Jade Hilton, excuse me. I apologize to that, Dr. Hilton. You join us now with more information on this. We're so very glad to have you. You are a professor of anesthesiology and critical care medicine, also the co-founder and medical director of Good Stock Consulting. So, Dr. Hilton, good morning to you. Let's just start with this new strain. Officials in Denmark, they say that the Omicron subvariant is more contagious than the original version of it, but not necessarily more severe. We know this is already in the United States. From where you're sitting, how worried should we be about this?
Right. You know, it's one of those things I don't think we should have ever not worried about COVID-19. So let's take that for what it is. What we know is that COVID-19, regardless if it's the Omicron and the BA2, which is the new variant, the stealth variant of Omicron, every version of Omicron has shown itself to be not healthy for human beings, right? And so we are seeing that with this new variant, that the Omicron has multiple sublineages. And so it's not just the BA2, there's other branches of this Omicron that's now circulate within our globe. And what COVID-19 has shown us is that it will always try to be 2 steps ahead of us, which means that we have to be hyper vigilant, vaccinate and boost as many people as possible, wear those masks, so we can stop this telephone game that's happening with COVID-19 from person to person to person across this globe.
Yeah, and Moderna is now entering the clinical trial phase for an Omicron-targeted booster vaccine dose. What do you make of that? Is that necessary? Do you think that is where we should be putting resources at this point in the pandemic? And for people who are just wondering about this, what advice do you have for them?
Right. I think any tool that we can put in our toolbox is going to be one that is greatly needed. What we know is that we do have waning immunity. And what does that mean? That means that when we're looking at Moderna in particular, after 2 doses, within 1 month after you got that second dose, about 85% of persons had neutralizing antibodies against Omicron, which is fantastic. But about 7 months after that second dose, we saw that drop to 55% of people. So from 85% to 55% of people. Once that person's got those booster shots, we saw a 20-fold rise in the Omicron neutralizing antibodies, which is fantastic again. But we also saw that after 6 months of that booster, the levels dropped about 6-fold. So the question is, how do we keep up? Because Omicron showed us versus Delta that it was able to evade the immune system better. So the way that we keep us is we say, how do we revise? How do we update, right? We update our computers all the time. How do we update these vaccines to keep up with what COVID is now presenting to us? And I think it's important because we know there's young children who have not been vaccinated at all. If Omicron is a new version of COVID that we need to deal with leading into the future, then we may be in the future dates, we may be skipping the original mRNA vaccines that we've had already with Moderna and Pfizer. And this may be our baseline which we build on.
All right, Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton, thank you so very much for your time. We appreciate it. Now, if you have a question for one of our doctors, please let us know. They are here and ready to answer your questions. You can email us at morningnewsnow@nbcuni.com with your questions. You can also let us know if you prefer to stay anonymous.
Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather?
Bill Cairns, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Elton and Joe. So snow, big snowstorm. This will be the biggest snowstorm as far as power goes of the winter season. This will likely be a blizzard for areas of Cape Cod, possibly even for down East Maine. So let's get into it. In order to get a big snowstorm, it has to be cold enough. We easily have that this morning. Take a look at northern Maine right now. That's not a misprint. That's not wind chill. That's the actual temperature when you step out the door, -28. That hurts. It's cold pretty much everywhere from the Great Lakes to the Northeast and even for much of the East Coast. So we already have 34 million people included in winter storm watches. Notice it's really confined to coastal locations and pretty much I-95 eastward towards the coast. So that means we're talking more of an ocean storm with very little mixing, if any. This may just be all snow. And unfortunately, I was hoping to come on this morning and say our models are in excellent agreement. Now we have unanimous decisions on who's going to get what. But unfortunately, we still have this pretty major disagreement between what we call our European computer model, which is typically the most accurate, and our American model, which has been upgraded, which is getting more accurate. So the European model still says a pretty good snowstorm from Philadelphia to New York, definitely eastern New England up through Maine. The difference with the American forecast is that it's further offshore, and it has hardly any snow for Philly, D.C., and New York. Still a big snowstorm for Cape Cod and areas of Maine. So that's where the disagreement is. We're hoping that irons itself out. We're still about 36 to 48 hours away from the actual snow event. So this is what we're going with now. We call this the National Blended Model. It kind of takes a lot of our different models and puts them all together, kind of like an average scenario. And at this point, this is really the best guidance we can give you. So it does not look like a huge event for D.C. to Richmond. You know, an inch or two can make it slippery Saturday morning, but not a huge ordeal. New York City, Atlantic City, somewhere around 3 to 6 inches is possible, maybe a little bit more, especially coastal New Jersey and out on Long Island. And then the blizzard conditions, what we are sure, I'd say high confidence of a high impact storm on Saturday. Not going to want to be on the roads, all of Cape Cod, Rhode Island, eastern Connecticut, back up to portions of Maine. So, you know, we'll try to iron this out, guys, definitely by tomorrow morning. But right now, if you have plans in eastern New England on Saturday, you're going to want to be wherever you are. You're going to want to stay.
Hope you like it. Wherever you are, I hope you like it. All right.
Yes, that's
all right. We'll check in next hour, Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Coming up, bad news if you own a home, a car, or a credit card.
Yeah, interest rates are about to go up for the first time in years. Details from the Fed and what it means for your wallet next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. Yesterday, the Federal Reserve laid out plans to raise interest rates over the coming months.
There'll be a series of small hikes aimed at slowing the economy enough to try and beat back inflation, which is at a 40-year high. Here's NBC News correspondent Tom Costello with more.
Mona, we're going to interrupt right now and go to Steve Leisman with the Fed decision.
The committee expects it will, quote, soon be appropriate to raise the target range.
It's a central bank strategy to fight skyrocketing prices from grocery aisles to gas stations. The Federal Reserve suggesting it will soon start slowly raising interest rates.
I think there's quite a bit of room to raise interest rates without threatening the labor market.
Analysts believe the Fed will raise rates gradually in quarter-point steps beginning in March. Higher interest rates will likely lead to more expensive car and student loans, credit cards, and new home mortgages, even as home prices nationally are up 14% in a year. Here in Phoenix, where new home prices have jumped 30%, Jacob Dennitz and his wife, Nicole, are struggling to find a new home and fear it could soon be out of reach.
It's turned into more of a business transaction rather than our first time home buying experience together that should be fun and enjoyable.
The coming rate hikes follow an unprecedented 2 years.
The stock market plunging, the worst single-day drop in history.
In March of 2020, the new pandemic and fear of a deep economic rout pushed the market into a steep dive. The Fed quickly dropped interest rates to near zero, helping to support the economy and limit the recession. But 2 years later, consumers are paying more for everything from food and clothing to cars and gasoline.
As we're seeing inflation rise, that is a signal to the Federal Reserve that something needs to be done.
Our thanks to Tom Costello for that report.
With the Federal Reserve pointing towards March to start raising interest rates, what does this mean for you at home, and how can you take advantage of the months before the rates start to rise again? NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle is here to explain.
So the official statement from Fed Chair Jay Powell was that this is a complicated economic picture, and we need to be humble and nimble. While we do have full employment and we are in an economic recovery, the inflation situation is a problem. That's why, while they're not doing it today, he very strongly signaled and put us in a position to expect that there will be a rate hike come March, and there could be more after that. Now, what does that mean for the everyday person tomorrow? Well, it means going forward, it could cost you more to get a mortgage, a bank loan, a credit card. So for those who are preparing for this rate hike in March, if you need any of those things, it would be a good time to lock them in now. But remember, the reason for doing this, for the overall reason, is to try to slow down the rate of inflation, prices continuing to go up. So if we do see rates go up a little bit, hopefully that will be overshadowed by prices going down a bit more. I'm Stephanie Rule, NBC News.
And now let's look at what's making news around the world this morning. Ali Arouzi joins us now for more from Tehran. Good morning, Ali.
Good morning, Alison. Well, heavy rains followed by tropical storms have killed many and caused major damage in Mozambique, Madagascar and Malawi. In northern Mozambique alone, 11 people have died, including children and elderly, while bridges and roads were washed away by the ferocity of the storm. In many places, electricity was knocked out and residential areas cut off by high waters, with reports of people on roofs calling for help. Pope Francis has called on parents around the world not to condemn children if they are gay. Francis addressed parents facing difficult situations in the lives of their children, such as sick kids, imprisoned, or kids that are killed in accidents. But he also addressed parents who see that their children have different sexual orientations, telling them not to hide behind condemning attitudes. And finally, Japan's favorite snack, umebo, a crunchy corn bar, which means delicious stick, has never been victim to financial markets. Around 700 million sticks of the popular snack are sold every year, and they've been selling for the same price for almost 4 decades. But now, because of the rising cost of importing corn from the U.S., the company has been forced to increase the price by a whopping 20%. And those are your headlines, Alison.
All right, Ali, thank you so much for that. Coming up on Morning News Now, turning guns into garden tools. After the break, the unique approach to gun violence that many hope will plant a seed for peace. And Bill Cairns is back with our weekly wrap on climate change, including how it could impact the future of the Olympics. We'll be right back. Broadway's longest-running show of all time is celebrating another pretty big milestone. Last night marked the 34th anniversary of Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Phantom of the Opera at the Majestic Theater. That show also made history as actress Emily Quachu became the first ever black actress to play the lead role of Christine Daae full-time. Back in October, she became the show's alternate leading lady. Phantom tells the story of a disfigured musical genius who falls in love with a young woman. The Broadway show has won numerous Tony Awards, including Best Musical. We're going to turn now to an issue that is impacting cities across America. Gun violence. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has tracked a surge in violent crime directly related to the increase in gun sales over the past year. The focus now is getting them off the street, and one group in Denver is coming up with a creative way to try and make a difference. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett has more.
What used to harm or take away life.
This here used to be a barrel of gun, looked like this.
Now being repurposed to help plant new life.
We're hearing from someone who's been affected by gun violence and then inviting the community that's present here today to take a turn with the hammer and helping us turn a gun into a garden tool.
It starts as a typical gun buyback event. People who turn their guns in receive compensation, but Mike and his Raw Tools team have a plan for what these guns can do.
Our mission is to disarm hearts, forge peace, and cultivate justice. And we do that by turning guns into garden tools, introducing people to resources that are alternative means of conflict resolution, like de-escalation and mediation.
This effort began after the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012. Since then, more than 1,000 guns have been through the process. But there's been a new push in the last 2 years, coinciding with a spike in gun violence, a significant increase during the pandemic, leading to more than 20,000 gun deaths in 2021.
So these buyback programs are a great idea for public messaging and for changing the culture. If we start to associate guns with negative messages, so we celebrate the destruction of guns, that's probably a good thing for our culture. We have 400 million guns in circulation, and any contribution to reducing that is helpful.
The idea of the transformation comes from a Bible verse about turning a sword into a plow. This, a modern interpretation that also serves the psychological effects of those impacted by gun violence.
I lost my cousin to gang violence when I was a senior in high school here in Denver. He was murdered at a gas station during a gang conflict. It was really, really powerful to think about the literal reshaping of a thing of violence into something that's going to help cultivate and grow. And so just an actionable thing that you can do to try to help stop the gun violence.
I took my frustrations out on the gun. I felt better. I loved it.
Charlotta Evans knows that frustration firsthand.
What drives me is the loss of my son, Kason Xavier Evans. I lost him to gun violence, children having possessions of guns, not being responsible with guns, adults not being responsible with guns.
Her 3-year-old son killed in a drive-by shooting by Raymond Johnson, who was just a teenager at the time.
I went to go hand Kason over to the paramedics, and he took his last breath in my arms.
Speaking ahead of the gun buyback event at this church service, Evans has since forgiven the shooter, helping abbreviate his prison sentence and mentoring him as her own son, she says. Now, she uses her story to speak out against irresponsible gun ownership and the potential for restorative justice.
We just cannot be self-centered about our gun ownership as if it's not hurting anyone else.
What do you make of those spikes in gun violence that we've seen so recently?
You know, we say the cliche, hurt people, but it is actual fact. And we're looking at a lot of mental health issues, a lot of trauma that's been untreated. And we really have to take a look at the lives of our youth because these youth are growing up into adults that have not yet been healed.
Now, there is some controversy over how effective gun buybacks actually are, but when you see the impact that even one gun can have on a family like Charlotta's, getting every single gun off the street, even in small increments, can be super impactful, obviously. One expert we spoke to pointed out that another policy that could dovetail into this is the idea of a mandatory report of stolen or lost guns, and that can be done state by state because there's a lot of pushback against the idea of a national buyback program. And so now this conversation is being started, but there's a lot more that can be done incrementally to get guns off the street at the end of the day.
All right, Mara Barrett, thank you so much for that. This year's Winter Olympics kick off in a few weeks, but a new study says climate change poses a long-term threat to the Games. That's one of the headlines we're following this morning as we take an in-depth look at how climate change is reshaping policy and lifestyles all over the globe. And as the world continues to warm up, the need for smart solutions to solve the problems in front of us are only growing. Joining us now with the latest climate news you need to know is NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, thanks for being back with us. Good to see you again. Let's start with this study that shows the threat global warming will have on the future of the Winter Olympics. How viable are the Games long term if countries don't do more to curb emissions?
Yeah, Allison, one of the things we really struggle with is to picture what the world is going to look like for our grandchildren. So the University of Waterloo decided to look at 2080. So that would literally be my grandchildren's era and what the Winter Olympics would look like. And what they found was that we've had 21 sites that have hosted the Winter Olympics up to this point. Out of those 21 sites, the only one of them, 1 out of 21 would still be viable to host it in 2080 because of global warming. And this is assuming our current emission levels. Here you can see where we've had them in North America. I mean, imagine Lake Placid not being able to host a Winter Olympics, Vancouver and Calgary, Squaw Valley, Salt Lake City. And then if we head over towards Europe, Sochi wouldn't be able to host it anymore. Sarajevo is also one of those locations. Even many locations in the Alps would be too warm in 2080 to reliably and safely host the Winter Olympics. And of course, this is all timely because next week we're having the Winter Olympics in Beijing. And by the way, it'll all be man-made snow in Beijing. There's no natural snow. The only city that this study says could still host the Winter Olympics in 2080 would be northern Japan and Sapporo. That would be it. So again, Allison, this was the quote. It said, "No sport can escape the impacts of the changing climate. Achieving the Paris Agreement target is critical to save snow sports as we know it."
In terms of renewable energy sources, obviously a very important component to this discussion, and one thing that has been pointed to as something that has a lot of potential and could be very important in the next decade or so is algae farming. Can you explain to us what that is and the potential that it might have?
Yeah, when I did the deep dive into algae, I was like, all right, algae sounds kind of boring, something floating in a pond. But do you realize that algae gives us 50% of our oxygen on this planet? And when I heard that, I was like, ooh, okay, this is interesting now. And it's also really good at consuming CO2. We need to get rid of the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and algae is an expert at doing that. So in a laboratory, they've been able to do this, but they haven't been able to do it at a large scale. A couple companies tried, but they have failed, mostly because you have to make such a large area of algae and then harvest it to make the biofuels. And these are biofuels that would go in your car or your plane, replacing the biofuels that we use now, like soybean. One of the things that is the biggest issue to this one, Ellison, is that it would take 3 times the size of Texas. That's how big the algae farm would have to be to provide us with all the liquid fuels that we currently use now in our country. So picture Texas and picture 3 times Texas. And that's how large scale this has to be. But about 35 Japanese companies are going to make a 12-acre farm of this, and they're going to try this. They're going to try to build this up to size.
That's so fascinating. We hear so much about algae, red algae, in sometimes I think negative context, be it in Florida or what have you. So to hear it like this, it's fascinating stuff. We will definitely keep an eye on that. And I consider you now our algae farming expert, so I will pepper you with questions. Let's talk about another study before we let you go. There's one that is out in the United Kingdom, and it shows an interesting relationship between people who choose to bike to work and traffic speeds. What can you tell us about that?
Well, have you ever biked to work before, Allison?
No, I'm afraid. Traffic, Bill.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly the point of this whole study. The study they brought a lot of people that live close to their workplaces, and they said, why don't you bike to work? And the number one reason was safety. So they found that if they talked to people, they said if traffic speeds were reduced by 20 miles per hour, there'd be a 6-fold increase in the number of people that actually will bike to work. It seems like there was this huge push for bike lanes and everyone biking, and then it kind of has died off a little bit. And safety is the number one reason why. And Ellison, you're not alone. It's mostly females that say the safety reasons. It's a much larger proportion of men that bike to work right now than females. So maybe one day this summer, we'll all bike to work. We'll have a bike to work day.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do it. But honestly, I watch cars flying by and I'm like, I don't know if I'm that good of a biker. I don't know what could happen. So it does make me nervous. But maybe if we do it as a team, it'll feel better. All right, yes. Bill Cairns, thank you so much. Bye. All right, and coming up on News Now, the real cost of $1. Mom and pop shops struggling to survive as dollar chain stores expand. More on the efforts to keep small businesses afloat. With discount stores like Dollar Tree and Dollar General spreading across the country, small-town businesses are fighting to keep up and stay afloat. NBC News correspondent Isa Gutierrez spoke with one small business owner about how she's hanging in amid all the competition.
Our life is going to be a little crazy, but we're ready.
Lucy Fargo and her husband Andrew are a few weeks away from opening their 3rd local market store, this one in Sackett's Harbor, New York.
This is going to be a grocery store, full deli, going to have lots of fresh meats and produce.
A village with fewer than 2,000 people, where the closest full-service grocery store is the next town over.
We see that there's a need here, and hopefully we can fill that need.
Lucy says the general store that had previously been open at their location shut down in 2019. She believes that competition from the Dollar General was one of the reasons the store closed.
We're not ever going to be able to compete with Dollar Generals or, even Walmart. We're never going to be cheaper than them.
But the Fargos are optimistic of their new store's chance of survival.
With us, you get personality. We get to know all of our customers on a first name basis. We like to do as much for the community as we can. We like to offer a variety of items that are made locally for people to help support their fellow neighbor.
You said that you've lived in the area forever. Mm-hmm. Have you really seen the change of these chains coming in? Do things feel different?
Yes, yeah. I feel like it's all, you drive down a country road and then, bam, there's a Dollar General, put up in a field that used to be a cornfield. They're everywhere.
The concern over Dollar General and other big box retailer competition isn't unique to Sackett's Harbor. It's shared nationwide, particularly in small town economies.
I kind of liken it to a cancer. They'll come in to susceptible neighborhoods, kind of metastasize.
Reverend Donald Perryman leads a coalition of faith leaders in Toledo, Ohio, with a mission to challenge disparities in poor and marginalized communities. His group called for Toledo officials to establish a healthy food overlay district
that incentivizes grocery stores. And this overlay district would restrict convenience box and other discount stores that primarily sell non-fresh food items.
We do have produce currently in about 2,000 stores and recently made commitments to add the fresh fruits and vegetables to up to 10,000 stores in the coming years.
With a population of roughly 269,000 people, Toledo currently has 21 Dollar General stores. These kinds of concentration levels led organizations in other cities to push for policies that prevent or restrict national chain discount stores like Dollar General from developing. Like in Stonecrest, Georgia, where the city adopted a total ban on dollar stores in 2019. Or Plainview, Nebraska, where a 2021 dollar store dispersal ordinance required a 1-mile separation for new stores.
From our lens, certainly we are disappointed anytime a policymaker or elected official will choose to limit the ability that the customer has to make choices.
According to the Institute of Local Self-Reliance, there are 27 cities and towns in 12 different states that have implemented a policy limiting how many dollar stores can exist within a certain distance of each other. Despite conflicting opinions from cities and towns across America, Dollar General has continued to expand, even during the pandemic.
During fiscal 2020, we added about 1,000 new stores. We're also adding about 1,000 new stores in this fiscal year. We've announced our store plan growth for 22, and we're planning to add about 1,100 new stores.
In a 2018 report, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance says some local grocers in Mobile, Iowa, and Haven, Kansas reported their sales dropped by about 30% once a Dollar General opened in the area.
I think it's fundamentally important to remember Dollar General is not a grocer. We are a general store. We see ourselves actually complementing a local grocery store.
But small business owners like the Fargos believe it's important for their communities to have a friendly, truly local option.
I wish there would be more mom and pops like us, people who are really going to have an impact. Yes, they're going to hire local. It's going to be people who are living there who are going to work there, but the products that they're buying are not going to be local.
Our thanks to Isa Gutierrez for that report.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Solana Hanau joins us this morning. Good morning.
Hey guys, good morning. Well, Elon Musk says Tesla won't introduce new models this year as it focuses on boosting deliveries instead of diversifying its lineup in the face of supply chain issues. Musk says churning out new vehicles like the Cybertruck would dent Tesla's growth. It's been nearly 2 years since Tesla last put out a new model, which was the Model Y compact SUV. The Cybertruck is delayed until next year. Musk says Tesla isn't currently working on the $25,000 car he's teased in the past. Apple is working on a new feature to allow small businesses to use iPhones to accept payments without the need for an external card reader. This has been anticipated since Apple bought a contactless payment startup in 2020. Bloomberg reports it could be coming via a software update in the next few months. It would likely use tap-to-pay technology similar to Apple Pay. Lowe's is going to the dogs and cats and birds. The home improvement chain is teaming up with Petco to open small pet shops inside Lowe's stores. The first is expected to open next month in the San Antonio area and then expand to 14 additional stores in Texas, North and South Carolina by the end of March. They'll offer products such as food, beds and toys, and services like grooming and vaccinations. Ellison and Joe, back to you.
Plus, it's one-stop hardware shopping for your pet who
Everything.
I guess they want to start building something.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
They have ideas.
Thanks, Alana.
You got it.
All right, and coming up, an emotional homecoming for an American hero.
How a Navy sailor killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor made his way home after 80 years. This is Morning News Now. For more than 8 decades, the location of Navy fireman Frank Nichols Jr.'s remains were a mystery.
Yeah, he died during the attack on Pearl Harbor, and his family was never able to have a proper funeral to say their goodbyes until this week. Here's NBC News correspondent Kevin Tibbles with more.
Just a kid from Wisconsin. Lost, it was thought, forever on December 7, 1941, in the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Frank Nichols Jr., nicknamed Junie, 23 years old, lived at 807 Porter Avenue, Eau Claire. Missing and presumed dead after the USS Oklahoma went down.
He attempted to jump into the sea from the bridge, and then his body disappeared.
429 sailors lost their lives that day. Junie's remains, along with hundreds of others, were never identified until now. Relatives Jack Collier and Kit Thompson learned the military was using DNA sampling to put names and faces to the unknown. Following his identification, Frank Junie Nichols has finally been returned.
He gave his life for his country. I don't know what else greater sacrifice there is.
Receiving full military honors at the arrival of his casket in San Antonio, Texas, where many family members now reside. A young sailor's journey now complete.
Do you feel like you've welcomed someone home?
Yes, he now has his own place.
Known now not only to God, but to those who never had the chance to meet him. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News.
Fantastic story. Good to see that. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.